There's crystal in there. When you put pressure on a crystal, it releases energy. When you put the pressure of the spinal fluid on the pineal gland, it sparks.
There's a way that you can practice compressing this phallus in the right way that begins to exert a mechanical stress on those crystals. Compresses the crystals again, and all of a sudden, you have this little radio receiver that can pick up frequencies that are in exact alignment with those waves.
When you're operating from your third eye, you're closer to real-time information because scientists discovered that there's a 7 to 8 second delay in between the time that something happens and the time that we realize it happens.
When the pineal gland becomes electrically activated and it's charged, now the body becomes a magnet, and the intensity of the activation of those crystals naturally is going to automatically draw those charged molecules to it. So now you have this prana tube moving an enormous amount of energy, and the person is switched on.
You must drink unfluoridated water. Everywhere you go, they're giving you that fluoridated water. Some bottled waters also have fluoride in them, so you have to be careful what bottled waters you get. Get a water filtration system for your house, one for your shower head and one for your drinking water. When you take a shower, your skin as an organ is taking in about 40 to 50% of whatever's in that water.
The pineal gland is responsible for the production of melatonin, which regulates your sleep patterns, but it does a lot more than that. According to Dr. Joe Dispenza, this thing is like a tiny radio receiver embedded in the back of your brain, and its strategic location and function can enable you to reach a heightened state of consciousness. In his experience, it can even enable traveling in time without moving your physical body. This is not a recent finding. The pineal gland looks like a pine cone, a symbol that has appeared an incredible number of times in several spiritual and ancient texts because of what it can do. The Egyptian staff of Osiris, created around 1224 BC, shows two snakes intertwining and meeting at a pine cone. And this depiction has a symbolic connection to the Indian concept of Kundalini, which is a spiritual energy in the body. Kundalini is often visualized as coiled serpents rising from the base of the spine to the third eye or pineal gland during enlightenment, just like the staff of Osiris. But besides that, Hindu deities are also often depicted with serpents and pine cones, both literally and symbolically. Shiva, one of the most important gods in Hinduism, is frequently portrayed with hair or a head shaped like a pine cone, usually entwined with a snake. But beyond spiritual enlightenment, pine cones have historically symbolized eternal life. Ancient Assyrian palace carvings from 713 to 716 BC show four-winged godlike figures holding pine cones. The pine cones in this context sometimes refer to the pollination of the tree of life, showing its role in both immortality and enlightenment. In Aztec culture, it was a symbol of spirituality and again, immortality. The Celts considered it a symbol of regeneration, and in Greek mythology, the top of Dionysus' staff was a pine cone and often used for rituals. Even the Bible references pine cones in the pineal gland in several instances, occasionally in a pretty direct manner. One notable example is in the book of Genesis, where Jacob spends the night wrestling with God and is instructed to adopt the name Israel. The scripture then states, "And Jacob called the name of the place Pineal, for I have seen God face to face and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Pineal, the sun rose upon him." In another interesting passage, Matthew seems to offer a description of the third eye that is very similar to what we find in yogic and Hindu spiritual traditions. And this one is important because it actually refers to the pineal gland as the only part of the brain that is singular, as opposed to having two parts like the brain's left and right hemispheres. The verse goes, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye be single, your whole body shall be full of light." All these are completely separate cultures, but all of them assign some great meaning to this object. Why? Simply put, the pineal gland is the seat of our third eye.
A lot of the mystical understandings that so many cultures had around this, pine cone shaped gland that somehow has all kinds of wonderful effects on the human biology. And it's called the third eye.
Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about how ancient Egyptians were fascinated with the netherworld, and their practices surrounding death and the afterlife showcase this. A good example of this is the Eye of Horus. In ancient Egyptian mysticism, this symbol represents protection, health, and higher consciousness. And digging deeper, we find a link to the pineal gland. In Egyptian mythology, Horus is a key deity symbolizing protection and divine authority, and he had an eye believed to hold mystical properties, providing protection against evil and the channel for divine insight. This eye is supposed to symbolize the pineal gland, the eye of wisdom, through which spiritual visions and higher consciousness are accessed. Ancient texts and artwork further hinted this. The Ujat eye, resembling the Eye of Horus, is often shown with the pine cone. Esoteric knowledge about the Eye of Horus and the pineal gland likely also influenced Egyptian religious rituals, healing practices, and spiritual teachings. They knew something we're still figuring out in terms of tapping into this third eye and achieving higher consciousness without the aid of drugs or experiences like ayahuasca. It's likely that priests and their disciplines also practice rituals to open this inner eye and connect with the higher force. But beyond spiritual texts, Dr. Dispenza explains what scientific research has uncovered about the pineal gland.
The pineal gland is a tiny little radio receiver that sits right on the top of your limbic brain, the seat of the autonomic nervous system, that automatic system. So it's packed, it's a phallus, and it's packed with these very, very dense crystals that are stacked up on top of each other that are six-sided. It sits right in the back of the third ventricle, towards the top of the head.
He goes on to explain that this gland is sitting just where the two brain hemispheres come together, and that the limbic brain surrounds it. This gland is immersed in fluid found inside the brain and spinal column, wrapped in dense connective tissue called dura mater. This fluid bathes the central nervous system, providing buoyancy, transmitting nutrients and neuropeptides, and protecting the nervous system. It also enhances electrical charges, aiding in the nervous system's conductivity. Now, Dr. Dispenza explains that we all have a mechanism that's natural to our bodies. When we inhale, the sutures of the skull open up, and the sacrum bone flexes back, causing the fluid to drain down. When we exhale, the sacrum flexes forward, the skull sutures close, and the fluid volume decreases. This movement creates a wave that pushes the fluid up. It's a cycle of steps forward and back, initiated by normal breathing, starting at the base of the spine and moving up to the brain. The fluid travels through 4 chambers, the 4th ventricle at the back of the neck near the brainstem, along aqueduct tube, and then into the 3rd ventricle where the pineal gland sits.
And then there's these 2 horns, these 2 lateral kind of horns that are other lateral ventricles where the fluid goes there, and then it goes whoop around this head and goes back down.
And the benefits of awakening the pineal gland and utilizing its true power are incredible.
Also, the third eye, it has these hairs on it, which are like receiving antennas, because it's your spiritual antenna, it's your connection to the higher dimensions that exist.
In fact, Dr. Joe Dispenza shares his own experience with multidimensional travel or time travel. But to understand that, we have to hear a bit more from Billy Carlson.
We know that this universe has 11 dimensions based on string theory. And what's interesting, in 2022, a new scientific study came out. They just discovered that the human mind can exist and perceive up to 11 dimensions, the same amount as the universe.
Carlson explains across his many interviews and videos that there are 11 dimensions, and though we exist only on the 3rd, ascending to these higher dimensions is possible if we can match our vibrational frequency to those dimensions. Traveling in and out of dimensions will then become second nature to us, and some higher dimensional beings have already figured it out.
So if there are beings in higher dimensions that have developed the ability to understand and get the actual subatomic frequency number of the 3rd dimension in this universe, they can theoretically walk from their universe or their dimension directly into ours. Like somebody there obtains the frequency of the 3rd dimension, they can just come right on through. This could be some of the reason for paranormal activity and things like that. It could be entities or beings having a peek into our world, into our dimension.
And this isn't entirely impossible. On the Know Thyself podcast, Joe Dispenza describes what feels like time travel linked to the activation of his pineal gland. One evening, after putting his kids to bed and sitting by a fire, Joe Dispenza entered a trance-like state. He concentrated on his pineal gland and experienced a vivid vision. He saw the gland vibrating and releasing a milky substance. He was then immediately transported to a huge timepiece with colors he had never seen before, and its hands started moving backwards.
The moment I see that hands of the clock going backwards in time, I'm thinking, while it's happening, I have the realization, oh my God, the pineal gland is a biological timepiece that allows us to travel forwards and backwards in time. I just had the thought, like, oh, that's what it is. As it's winding backwards, I realize I'm moving through time. But I'm not going anywhere.
Joe described feeling like he was moving through different spaces and dimensions stacked on each other. He experienced his life backward until he was a 9-year-old child. He saw himself as a child and simultaneously felt what it was like to be that child again, deeply engrossed in understanding time. This dual perspective led Joe to feel a profound love for his younger self, realizing this love was pulling his past self toward his present identity. Suddenly, he found himself moving forward in time, this time landing on his ranch in the Northwest.
And I'm walking with this long cape in the back pastures. I'm coming through the back pastures where the mares are, and I cross through the gate, and I come through the gardens, and I'm barefoot. And it's a November evening, and there's a blanket of prisms of frost along the carpet of the grass, and I can see it go on as the moon hits it. And I'm walking barefoot, and the ground is ice cold, and it feels amazing. Like it felt like I was part of the whole. Like the cold was pleasurable to me. I didn't have an aversion to it. I was part of nature, it was part of me. I was connected. I don't know how to describe it.
He goes on to say that in this vision, he met a radiant, small woman who filled him with an overwhelming sense of love, far greater than he had ever felt before. And as he returned to the space where he started, he was filled with a need to further investigate the mystical and scientific aspects of what just happened to him.
How could I feel such a strong emotion from something that I don't know, that I didn't experience in three-dimensional reality? And then, so that furthered my investigation, both in the research department of the pineal gland, but then also a lot of the mystical understandings that so many cultures had around this, pine cone-shaped gland that somehow has all kinds of wonderful effects on the human biology.
And in his research, he discovered, or rather rediscovered, the way to activate the pineal gland. And it's not overly complicated. According to both Dr. Dispenza and Billy Carson, all that's required is breath work. But before we can get to awakening the pineal gland, there is a major step we have to take in first detoxifying this gland by removing the calcium deposits in it, a process called decalcification. Now, calcification happens through natural processes like aging and metabolic activity. These essentially create the formation of calcium phosphate crystals in this gland. But according to Billy Carson, some daily activities actually speed up this formation process, like fluoride exposure through our tap water and toothpaste.
Your water, most water, especially tap water, has fluoride in it. You go to a restaurant, you say, I'll have a glass of water. That's fluoridated water. Everywhere you go, they're giving you that fluoridated water. Some bottled waters also have fluoride in them, so you have to be careful what bottled waters you get.
Also, the overconsumption of packaged foods or processed meats and our constant exposure to environmental pollutants are affecting calcification rates. So the way to overcome this problem of a blocked pineal gland is pretty straightforward. First, look at your choice of bottled water. Brands like Saratoga and Mountain Valley come in glass bottles, which helps you avoid the harmful chemicals found in plastic. You also need to avoid leaving your bottles in hot places, like in your car during the summer, because heat causes harmful chemicals like BPAs to leach from the plastic bottle into the water. You also want to think about using water filtration systems at home, because when you shower, your skin absorbs about 40 to 50% of whatever is in the water, including fluoride, pharmaceuticals, and other toxins. Carson suggests buying individual filters for each faucet and the shower head.
Those will be a little bit more expensive than just the basic filter,
Sure.
but it's worth it to make sure that you're putting in, your body is made of 70 to 80% water. So you want to be putting in clean, fresh water into the body to rejuvenate your cells and your mitochondria.
But the best thing you can do to decalcify and detox your pineal gland is to drink fresh, clean water as much as possible. Alongside this, maintaining a clean diet by avoiding processed foods and exercising regularly can significantly reduce these calcium deposits and contribute to your overall health. Once you begin detoxifying your body and gaining more clarity, you can actually implement Dr. Dispenza's technique of awakening your pineal gland to tap into its full potential.
So we do a particular breath by using the intrinsic muscles to blow air out and then follow your breath from your perineum and to pull that life force,
which is
the creative force.
Perineum is the space between things.
The space down there. And the same muscles you use to eliminate, front and back, same muscles you use for intercourse. To coordinate the movement of the muscles instead of releasing energy out, to practice pulling that energy up with your breath, following it into your lower abdomen, locking your belly button down, continue your breath into your gut, lock your core, and if you go 1, 2, 3 like that, bring your shoulders down, lift your chest up, straighten your spine, that fluid starts to accelerate up by increasing pressure in there.
He goes on to explain that when you speed up charged molecules, which are ions, proteins, and salts in a solution, they generate an external field called an inductance field. And as this fluid starts moving faster, it creates this field, and the energy flows through a tube directly to the brain. When you finish this breath exercise, you have to focus on the 6th center and keep your attention there. By practicing this technique, you can exert mechanical stress on the crystals in the pineal gland. This stress causes the crystals to polarize, creating a positive charge on one end and a negative charge on the other, like tiny diamonds. This polarization generates an external electromagnetic field. When the crystals reach their physical limit and can't stretch anymore, the field reverses, compressing the crystals again. This process turns the pineal gland into a little radio receiver that picks up frequencies aligned with these waves, acting as a transducer. Energy then moves to the brain, carrying the emotions stored in the body. When the sympathetic nervous system activates, it releases this energy back to the brain, and the gate in the brainstem opens, allowing energy to flow into the limbic brain, which is the center of the autonomic nervous system. The brain enters this high gamma state, and the pineal gland, now electrically charged, has a positive charge on one end and a negative charge on the other.
Now you have a positive charge here and a negative charge down here, and what do you have? Now the body becomes a magnet, and the intensity of the activation of those crystals naturally is going to automatically draw those charged molecules to it. So now you have this prana tube moving an enormous amount of energy, and the person is switched on.
And when you succeed in unlocking this, some fascinating things happen in your brain and nervous system. As Dr. Dispenza explains, first, your brain enters a heightened state, and the part of your brain responsible for your personality and self-awareness, called the neocortex, become less active. This shift moves you into a theta state, which is typically associated with deep relaxation and meditation. And during this process, the brain stops its usual pattern of analyzing and thinking. It actually goes into a true relaxation state for probably the first time in a long time. This is because the energy moving into the brain helps you become less analytical and more present in the moment. As the limbic brain, which is tied to your emotions and memories, switches on, it creates a sense of coherence in your nervous system. You can think of it like a radio tuning into a clear signal. When the signal is clear and coherent, it can pick up information much better. When the pineal gland is activated, it acts like an antenna, receiving information from the environment. This information is then translated into visual images or insights, just like how a TV antenna picks up signals and shows different channels on the screen. There are countless frequencies in the quantum field, meaning there are infinite experiences and insights available beyond what our regular senses can perceive.
We discovered in our functional MRIs that when the person has the default mode network shut off, which means they're not trying to predict the future, they're not trying to anticipate anything, they're completely in the present moment. When the default mode system is shut off, then when you don't expect anything to happen, that's when the unexpected happens.
The decrease in brain compartmentalization and the increase in order are directly linked to mystical experiences, which he calls the unexpected. People having these experiences show brain activity similar to what happens under the influence of certain psychedelic substances, but in this case, people are getting to this state naturally. All of this gives you a feeling and a perception you wouldn't normally achieve otherwise. According to Billy Carson, it feels like waves crashing over you and all around you as you stand completely still. And this matches Dr. Dispenza's feeling of staying in one place while he traveled backward and forwards in time.
So the average person is like a person standing in the ocean with the wave crashing over them, and when the wave crashes, that's when they realize, oh, this moment just happened. But when you're operating from your third eye, you're surfing on the wave. So you're closer to real-time information, because scientists discovered that there's a 7 to 8 second delay in between the time that something happens and the time that we realize it happens.
Carson backs this up by explaining a fascinating scientific study where researchers placed people in dark rooms with TVs hooked up to EEGs that were connected to computers. The original aim of the experiment is to see how the brain responded to different emotions. Every 10 seconds, they would show participants a new image on the screen. The photos range from peaceful scenes like a woman cuddling a baby or a bed of flowers to disturbing ones like someone being murdered or a car accident. These images alternated between peaceful and disturbing to clock the tiniest changes in the brain. And what happened next was surprising. In every case, the brain started transmitting information to the computer about 7 to 8 seconds before the next image appeared. This meant that the brain or consciousness was experiencing the next images before they were even shown on screen. It took the physical body 7 to 8 seconds to process and become aware of these images in real time.
Consciousness has already experienced what's happening. It took us in this corporeal body 7 to 8 seconds to actually realize it, for it to be now current time. So they realize there's this delay between information that exists and the human body processing it and it being us being made aware of it. So everything that we see going on around us is 7 to 8 seconds delayed, unless you're moving from the third eye, the pineal gland. When you tap into that and you bring awareness to it, your intuition skyrockets, and intuition turns you into a surfer versus a person that's standing in the ocean waiting for the wave to crash over them.
Awakening the pineal gland and opening the third eye would impact how we perceive and interact with reality. If we consider Billy Carson's idea about eliminating the 7-8 second delay in processing information, we could start to imagine living in a heightened state of awareness and intuition. Our reactions to events would be almost instant, meaning we could potentially avoid accidents or make decisions with a level of foresight that seems almost supernatural. We would have deeper spiritual experiences and access ideas and solutions far beyond our current limitations. Since our intuition would be sharper, we could tap into insights that we might otherwise miss. But not every aspect of this will be blissful. Some things might come up that you have to deal with, which won't be pretty. And while it can end up teaching you something important, the journey won't be easy.
And in the case of opening your third eye, it becomes emotional baggage, okay? And this is some things that people have to be ready to deal with, because you're looking at a situation where you become more awakened and more aware. You start to see things different. When you hear people talking, what they're saying now sounds different. You're able to make different connections to what they're talking about and see right through them. But the biggest problem you have is expressing this higher level of knowledge to them or even others. They don't want to hear it. They can't hear it. They can't see it. They can't understand it. They reject it. A lot of the times it causes anger, friction, frustration against you. And then that in turn gives you bad emotions. And so you get this feeling of being alone.
When you start to awaken your pineal gland and open your third eye, it can be a profound and enlightening experience, but it won't be welcomed by everyone. One of the major issues Carson talks about is the sense of isolation you might feel. Even if you're surrounded by people, you can feel incredibly alone because your experiences and perceptions are suddenly very different from those around you. You can't fully articulate what you're experiencing. You're just starting out, a sort of freshman or intern in the mysteries of the universe, and yet, when you try to share your experiences, people might reject you, laugh at you, or accuse you of dealing with demons. This can make you feel even more alone and vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation. Also, opening your third eye can make you highly sensitive to the world around you. You might start noticing the repetitive behaviors of people and the mechanical motions of daily life. This heightened awareness can be traumatizing because it shatters your previous understanding of reality. Suddenly, everything you once believed starts to seem artificial and superficial. The normal world isn't set up for this heightened state of sensitivity, and it can make you feel anxious and uncomfortable. So detoxifying and opening up your pineal gland is something you need to be prepared for, just like you would prepare for any psychedelic experience. Because this hyper-awakened state can be just as dangerous as remaining asleep to the true nature of our reality.